They were returning from school and were distractedly chatting on the passenger bus at the corner of Cuauhtemoc Sin and Calzada de San Antonio Abad streets. A tram from the Tlalpan line didn't manage to brake in time and crashed full force into the vehicle they were traveling in, brutally crushing it against the wall. On the floor lay a shattered 18-year-old girl named Frida Kahlo. In the crash, she had lost part of her clothing and was completely covered in blood. A golden dust, it was gold carried in an envelope by a worker who was a passenger, covered her like a brilliant mantle. The composition of the scene was like a painting as colorful and heartbreaking as the ones she herself would paint in the near future. Frida Kahlo was torn between life and death. Her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias, had only suffered severe blows to the hip. It was Thursday, September 17, 1925. Frida was taken with other injured to the hospital. The prognosis was grim. No one guaranteed that she would survive. She had her spine broken in 3 parts in the lumbar area, 2 ribs and a collarbone broken, 11 fractures in one of her legs, a foot and a shoulder dislocated, and to top it all off, the metal handrail had pierced her pelvis and exited between her legs through her noble part. They had to patiently and skillfully reassemble her skeleton. Frida Kahlo did not die that day, but she earned a passport to perpetual pain. The tremendous accident forced her to chew on time and anguish, but it gave the world a masterful painter because her talents had no choice but to come to the surface. In today's video, I'm going to tell you a little about the life of Frida Kahlo, and don't forget that down here you can find the membership where there will be extra content. Guillermo Kahlo, a German photographer of Jewish-Hungarian origin, and his wife Martil de Calderon, who had indigenous blood running through her veins, were the parents of Frida Kahlo, born on July 6, 1907. The first son of the Kahlo family died 6 days after birth. The third daughter, Christina, the youngest, was Frida's great friend and companion during her youth years. The Kahlo family lived in a house on London Street, number 247 in the Coyoacan neighborhood of Mexico City. Today, this house is known as the Blue House and was turned into a museum after the painter's death. At the age of 6, Frida had her first life's blow. She contracted polio during a pandemic that was ravaging the world. She had to spend 9 months in bed. One leg was left scrawny and without strength. It was her father who encouraged her rehabilitation. The little girl began to practice sports that were not at all common among the women of her generation, which were football and boxing. In the year 1922, at 15 years old, Frida entered the National Preparatory School, one of the most prestigious in Mexico. From there came brilliant minds. There were only 35 women among the 2,000 students, so she quickly stood out for her rebellious character and joined a gang of young intellectuals committed to student politics who fought authority and propelled reforms in that group that called themselves the Cachuchas for wearing cloth hats that defied the strict canons of the time. However, the turning point of her life would occur on a Thursday 3 years later when her body was shattered into 1,000 pieces under the tram on her way back from the hospital to her home in Coyoacan. A month later, she had no choice but to observe the world from another perspective. She couldn't sit up, so her mother ordered the making of an easel that was set up on a kind of scaffold so she could paint. Lying down, the device also had a light attached to it, and a mirror was placed on the ceiling that allowed her to look at herself and thus be her own model. Parallel to this creative leisure, Frida had to endure her slow reconstruction. That was something that would last her entire life. Several successive plaster and steel corsets were supporting her battered spine, and her dislocated foot required a specially designed device. Although some of her bones were soldering, she would need a total of 32 surgeries to repair her body. The first self-portrait she made, where she was clad in a velvet suit, was for her then-boyfriend Alejandro Gomez Arias, trying to imitate a painting he admired, The Birth of Venus by Botticelli. Interestingly, it would be with this returned painting that she would seduce the great painter Diego Rivera, the true love of her life. The legend tells that Frida would have met the famous artist when he painted a huge mural in the amphitheater of the National Preparatory School, where she was one of the few young students. Frida would have followed him to watch him work and would have told her classmates, "My ambition is to have a child with Diego Rivera, and I'm going to tell him one day." Her friends laughed at that moment. Rivera was an older man, huge and also pot-bellied. Another version would have been where Frida decided to go see him to show him her work while he was doing a series of murals. She took 4 paintings for him to see, but the one that most impressed the famous painter was the one she had made as a gift for her ex, Alejandro. He thought it was different and told her, "You have talent, keep painting." Even though he was 19 years older than her, the romance was immediate. For Frida's parents, Diego Rivera was not a good candidate. He had 2 divorces under his belt and was a declared communist, something very difficult for a conservative family, but on the other hand, he knew how to be seductive and charming. Besides, he was cultured and wealthy. The relationship ended in marriage on August 21st. 1929. Diego, at 43, was huge and was nicknamed the Elephant. Frida, at 22, was tiny and fragile, and they called her the Dove. In the year 1930, her great desire to become a mother seemed to be coming true. She became pregnant, but shortly into the pregnancy, the doctors said that due to the aftermath of the accident, the baby was forming in a completely unviable position. She had to have a therapeutic abortion, and they predicted that it was most likely she would never be able to have children. Frida at that moment sank into an abyss. A year later, the couple moved to San Francisco in the United States of America. Rivera had been commissioned a series of murals in that country, and on the other hand, politics in Mexico had become complicated for those who thought like them and were active in the left. By then, Diego Rivera's affairs with other women had begun, and Frida suspected and suffered. In Detroit, Frida became pregnant again. It was 1932. 3.5 months into the pregnancy, on July 4th, 1932, she had a major hemorrhage and unfortunately lost the baby spontaneously. That new and painful loss was poured by Frida into a painting known as Henry Ford Hospital. She reflected her desolation by painting herself naked on a hospital bed on a white sheet soaked in blood. From her left eye falls a large tear, and from her belly emerge 6 red veins that, like umbilical cords, connect with other symbolic images. In the center is the baby that was not born. Her husband, Diego Rivera, immediately realized the importance of this painting. Frida was doing something that no other painter had done before, capturing the most visceral aspects of her existence on a canvas with brutal force. That summer, Frida's mother also died while undergoing gallbladder surgery. One blow after another after another. When they returned to Mexico in 1934, Frida and Diego settled in the San Angel neighborhood with 2 houses that they joined by a bridge located on the terrace of both buildings. Here she became pregnant again. The third child was on the way, but disappointment would be inevitable once again. This baby would also not be born. That same year, they had to amputate some toes from Frida's right foot, and for her part, she focused more than ever on painting. It was the only thing that provided her peace. Similarly, Diego's romances with other women were not unknown to her. As I had already told you about those others, she would say that they were young painters of great talent, and according to her own writing about Diego, talent is always in direct relation to the temperature of his lows. On the other hand, Frida had made Diego hire her younger sister Cristina as a secretary. She had also convinced Cristina to be her nude model for a work he was doing, and that was called Knowledge and Purity. Diego never repressed any impulse towards the opposite sex. The sister and her husband ended up betraying Frida without the slightest scruple. Shortly after, Frida painted her bloodiest picture, A Few Pickets, where a woman lies on a bed after being stabbed by her partner. What she had read in the newspaper about what that man had said scared her. According to the criminal, he had only given her a few little stabs, a few pricks. Although there were those who also said that it reflected her feelings about the betrayal she had experienced from Diego and Cristina. But Frida and Diego needed each other, so the reunion was inevitable. A year later, the couple reconciled, but Frida, who seemed to have accepted Rivera's delights, did not lag behind. She also had her romances. She was attributed several love affairs with men and also with women, among them the artist Georgia O'Keeffe, the dancer Josephine Baker, and the actress Dolores Del Rio. However, those homosexual affairs did not anger Rivera as much as the one Frida had with the sculptor Isamu Noguchi. He got so furious that he even pointed a gun at them to end the romance. In 1937, the Russian revolutionary of Ukrainian origin Leon Trotsky was sheltered along with his wife Natalia Achedova in Frida's family home in Coyoacán. He arrived in Mexico escaping from the Russian leader Stalin, who had given the order to eliminate him. In the first few months, Leon and Frida would have had an intense romance that did not prosper, it is believed, because Leon's wife would have given her husband an ultimatum. In 1939, December 8, 1940, Frida gets involved with the Dr. Heinz Bergruen in New York, who for his part, Diego Rivera goes out with the painter Irene Bose, and with the American actress Paulette Goddard, who finally on November 6, 1939, December 8, 1940, Diego gathers courage and asks Frida for a divorce. Sometime later, Frida travels to San Francisco to have surgery with Dr. Eliezer. The reunion with her ex was so strong that they decided to remarry on December 8, 1940.
But this time, Frida imposed her own rules. They would live together, share expenses and their love for art, but they would have no sexual life. Going back to Frida's health, it never improved. On the contrary, it worsened over time. Successive hospitalizations, a failed bone transplant attempt, and pain, always pain. Meanwhile, she continued with her classes and painting, and all she lacked was having her own exhibition.
In April 1953, her wish came true at the Contemporary Art Gallery. Frida's health by that time was so deteriorated that the doctors forbade her to go. She never contemplated the idea of missing what she most desired in the world. She had a hospital bed placed in the middle of the exhibition, and an ambulance transported her to the place. Beforehand, she took all possible medications to alleviate her torments. The present guests were shocked when they saw her appear, adorned with her typical costumes and ornaments. Frida, for her part, appeared happy, sang the classic Mexican corridos, and drank to her heart's content. 4 months later, in August 1953, she went to her appointment with Dr. Juan Faril. He carefully examined her right leg and foot, where there were only 3 toes. Farrell explained that due to the gangrene, something much more drastic would have to be done, amputating her right leg. They cut it off below the knee, which she commented on with irony and bitterness after the surgery. Feet? Why do I need feet if I have wings to fly? In 1954, she was diagnosed with bronchopneumonia and sadly passed away on a Tuesday the 13th, 67 years ago, just a few days after turning 47. As a myth, the day she left doesn't seem coincidental. Tuesday refers to the red planet, destruction, and the Roman god of war, and people often forebode bad luck on Tuesday the 13th. But anyway, Frida Kahlo left us, but she left behind an incredible body of work, more than 200 pieces, and her beautiful blue house. In the last line of her diary, she had written before leaving, "I joyfully await the exit and hope to never return." If you enjoyed this video, remember to follow me on my social networks and secondary channel, Pepe Mystery. Thank you.